All right, I'm Kendall.
Jake?
Hey, Marina.
And we're going to talk to you about World War II.
Yes, we're going to talk specifically about World War II outside of the Pacific. So, starting in North Africa, the United States landed troops on November 8th of 1942 in the locations with the arrows in Morocco and Algeria, which were both French controlled territories, but the Nazis and the Italians were there trying to overtake them. They battled for about 6 months, and it ended in an Allied victory on May 13th, 1943, with America losing over 2,000 soldiers and 9,000 wounded. The battle was called Operation Torch, which the United States were in a way unprepared for, as they hadn't been in a war since World War I. But they got it together around December, and they were able to continue the battle and win back those territories for the French.
So then 2 months later, on July 10th of 1943, the U.S. and the British land in Sicily, Italy, and by mid-August, the Allies control all of Sicily.
Mm-hmm.
On September 9th, the U.S. British troops land on the beaches of Salerno near Naples. And by January 22nd, 1944, the Allies continue to advance up the coastline to Rome. And by June 4th, the Allied troops secure Rome, making it controlled by the U.S. until the war is over.
Yep. 2 days after the United States control Rome, well, the Allies control Rome, the Allies launch the Normandy invasion, also known as Operation Overlord. This is one of the biggest, probably the biggest operations of the entire war, and maybe the biggest operation in United States military history, as U.S. paratroopers along with the British land on Omaha Beach, Utah Beach, Gold, Juneau, and Sword, and they try to create a new Western Front that will lead them through all of France and into Germany. At the time, there had only been an Eastern Front created by the Russians, and the United States needed to penetrate the borders so that they could make their way towards Germany. It ended up in an Ally victory as they continued to march on their way to Paris, but there was plenty of wounded soldiers, and a lot of Americans and British were killed along with Canadians.
Many of the paratroopers that tried to parachute down into the German line, they ended up drowning, or they died before they even got to where they were headed.
Yeah, and Operation Overlord, commonly known today as D-Day, and it was the most important day for the United States in the entire war. Yeah, they marched straight towards Paris, and then while the Germans were making... Yeah, there you go.
So while the Germans were moving north, we ended up placing troops in South France in Nice, and once they landed there, they ended up moving rapidly northeast towards the Rhine River.
Yep, right here.
And then on August 25th, the Allied troops reach and free Paris.
By September, the Allies reached the German border, and by December, virtually all of France, most of Belgium, and the southern Netherlands were all liberated, and this led American soldiers to believe that they would be home by Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
But little did they know that Germans were going to launch their final offensive push on December 16, 1944, which is known today as the Battle of the Bulge. This was their attempt to reclaim Belgium and push Allied forces away from the German border, but it was really poorly planned.
Yeah, Hitler attempted his last push on the Allies with the Battle of the Bulge in the Ardennes. I don't know if that's pronounced right. It was a force in Belgium and Luxembourg in the Netherlands, where it was freezing cold temperatures. At that point, the Allies and the Germans were both running low on ammo. They were worn out from the war, especially from D-Day. And it was to put it lightly, a bloodbath. And it lasted for a couple months, and it ended on January 1st with an Allied victory as they were able to make their way to the German border.
So by January 1st, the Germans had retreated, and a couple months later, March 7th rolls around, and the U.S. crosses Rhine, invading Germany, and this is at Remagen. And the first camp that the United States found regarding concentration camps was Buchenwald. And by the time they'd gotten there, the Germans had actually burned all the sleeping quarters, and they used the last of their ammo to kill all of the living Jews that were in those concentration camps.
Mm-hmm.
The World War II also affected the Americans back at home in many different ways. It stimulated our economy because of the loans that we were giving out to other countries in the beginning of the war to help fight the Germans. So it got us out of our Great Depression that we were in prior.
Yeah, and it was also a breaking point for racial relations in the United States, as African Americans for the first time were equal in the military, even though they had to fight in separate battalions as white Americans. They were for the first time equal soldiers.
And then also women had a huge impact on us winning World War II. Actually, Germany and Hitler, they didn't utilize women part of their workforce while all of the men went off to fight, and Hitler found it absolutely absurd that America started utilizing their women to pick up the jobs that all of the men left once they went off to war. So because women got to start picking up all the jobs, which range from producing weaponry, missiles, ammo, they also worked as like lab techs, they just driving trucks, they picked up anything that the men had been doing before. And this was a huge push for not only productivity in America for us in World War II, but also for women proving that their worth and, you know, having equality. So after World War II, though, once all of the men came back, they actually reclaimed all of the jobs that the women had taken over, and there was a little bit of animosity because of that.
Yeah, World War II really brought the entire country together, and it threw out racial segregation or sexism within the country, because we started to realize that if we didn't all come together, we would not be able to win the war. And even major companies that were making profits off of capitalism, like Ford Motor Company, directed all of their focus on producing military weapons in cities like Detroit and Ypsilanti. And companies like that are really the reason that we were able to produce at such a high level, while the Germans relied on prisoners to make all their things. So it was really our economy that got us through the war, and the people back home that were able to produce all the weapons for the war. Oh yeah, Italian American, German Americans, and Japanese Americans all fought in the war, which Italy, Germany, and Japan were the Axis in the war, but the American citizens from those countries fought in the war against their countries. And there was even a Japanese battalion that is one of the most decorated battalions in the history of America. So
it's just another example of how everyone came together during the war to prove what America truly is, like a big, huge, like melting pot of different people, because without each and every person who fought the war, it could have ended in many different ways, especially looking back at D-Day and everything that the women and the people left back at home did.